So I think it's time to actually start. Welcome everyone to another webinar in the Red into Black series. My name, for those who don't know, is Stephen Michelle. I'm the Director of PCI Partners. And today we're joined by Linda McClellery-Smith, who is the Victorian Small Business Commissioner, to talk a little bit about how the Victorian Small Business Commission can actually assist. Just a couple of housekeeping things. There's a chat function at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to raise any questions that you might have as we go through, but we'll take the questions at the end of the session. The session will go for around 30 minutes, and those that have attended before know that we pretty much keep to that type of time frame. So anyway, we welcome you. Thank you very much for attending today. And thank you, Linda, for sharing some time with us to explain a little bit about what the Victorian Small Business Commission can do. I'll just give you a little bit of background as to Linda. So Linda was most recently the Executive Director of Regulatory Operations with the Victorian Building Authority. She was also had roles within the Fair Work Ombudsman and particularly the small business strategy area. And so she's highly qualified to take the role as Victorian Small Business Commissioner. And we came across the Victorian Small Business Commission. We were wondering really actually what the Commission actually does. So Linda, just to start off with, and thank you for attending today, how does the Victorian Small Business Commission support small business?
Thanks, Stephen, and hello. Thank you for everyone joining today or who might be watching afterwards as well. So it's great to be able to chat directly to practitioners such as yourselves. So the Victorian Small Business Commission has almost had its 20-year birthday. So next year, the Commission will have been around for 20 years. And in fact, it was the first small business commission in the country. And we've got a couple of different roles. So we've got one role with respect to alternative dispute resolution. So one of the big purposes of the existence of the Commission is to provide free or low-cost dispute resolution for small businesses. So why did that all start in the first place? The recognition that small businesses are often constrained in their ability to be able to go to court or go to a tribunal. Not that anyone, irrespective of size, wants to end up in a court or a tribunal, but there are circumstances in running a small business where it's hard to be able to navigate issues where problems come up and where disputes arise. And if I could use a kind of theme throughout all of the time, Stephen, around our jurisdiction and what we can help with, there's a common thread is there's an inequity of bargaining power. So our broad sort of services that we can offer for alternative dispute resolution come under a few different pieces of legislation, which I won't bore you with, but effectively, if a small business, undefined, so my Act does not have a definition of small business, it's really up for us to do a bit of a sense check about, does this business consider themselves to be a small business? And generally speaking, that's good enough for us. There's only been a couple of times where we've had to tell some listed companies that they'd be better off going and using another service rather than our service for small businesses, but that happens really rarely. So we provide, if a small business is in some kind of dispute with anyone, largely except obviously an employee, of course, or a retail consumer. So if a small business is having a dispute with another business about something, and that could be, for example, unpaid invoices, it could be that you've paid for something that you didn't receive, or that the services that you procured from another business weren't up to scratch. We also work really heavily in the tenant and landlord relationship space for retail leases. So we did more broadly for all commercial leases throughout COVID, when there was a commercial tenancy relief scheme, but our broad sort of area of operation in navigating landlords and tenants is in between in the retail leasing space. So, and a landlord can apply to us as well for assistance as well. So that goes to, again, a commonality of being, there's a question about the level playing field in terms of the bargaining power. If you have any clients out there who are operating as smash repairers and are having disputes with insurers, as is not uncommon, we can also help in that space as well. And we can also assist owner drivers, including some in the gig economy, as well as forestry contractors contractors as well. So all of those dispute resolution services that we provide are available to basically a small business in Victoria who's got a problem, an issue with another, it could be government, doesn't just have to be business to business. There might be something that either for you or one of your clients, they're having a problem with local council or state government, federal government, what have you. One of the parties just needs to be a small business. So the remit's really broad. So we try and make sure that we offer our dispute resolution services really broadly so that they're targeted to the businesses who can most benefit from our help. So what does that actually look like in terms of what we do? So if a business does have a dispute, they can pick up the phone and have a chat to us. So, and last year, almost 20,000 businesses did exactly that. And then we will often give some tips and advice on, if you're in a bit of a pickle, you're having an issue with another business or government departments, and tips on how to sort of have a go at resolving that yourself. If that's not successful, a small business or their representative can lodge a dispute application with us through our online portal. So you can put your hand up and say, we need some help with like some formal dispute resolution assistance. And at this point, it's all free. It doesn't cost a cracker. So businesses can say, or their representatives can say, here's my situation, here are the contact details of the other person, can you please help? And we've got a team of really experienced dispute resolution officers whose job it is to listen to both sides, because there's always two sides to the story. Listen to both sides, try and be that independent person in the middle, the circuit breaker, if you like, who can hear both sides of the argument, not make any decisions or, make an order or anything, but just find those threads with the parties where you can sort of encourage the parties to think about how they could resolve this particular dispute. And one thing we're particularly seeing at the moment is because of, the world kind of having been upended over the last few years, that there are many times where businesses have entered into arrangement with other businesses and just there's an inability to deliver. So, you could have a great contract that says X was meant to get delivered to your business on set date by another business. But if that's stuck in a port overseas and it just can't get out of the port for a whole range of different reasons, sure, you could go off to court to try and enforce your contractual rights, but it's very rarely will it ever be worth the cost. It'll take you years, and it's of course so stressful. So while you or your clients are doing that, they're not actually working in their business and thinking about their business too. And court is not for the faint-hearted. So we with the disputes we get at that early resolution point for helping the small businesses, in the last couple of years, we've resolved around 45% of the disputes just with that early intervention from our staff. We provide a bit of a safe space for people to be able to talk through, and often at the moment it's people talking about how they're feeling, not only within relation to the dispute, but just the cups are kind of full. I can use that language for our small business operators, and they've been navigating and dealing with a lot over the years, the last couple of years in particular. So the ability to talk to someone who's independent, who is impartial, and can offer some support about how they might frame up their circumstances. So 45% get resolved at that point with just effectively a little bit of phone calls.
Yeah. So let's unpack a little bit of that if we can. So to start with, a small business, there's no... so it can be a sole trader.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
so a sole trader, a company, a partnership.
Yes.
Anything basically that is a small business, but
that's right. We're the only one in terms of with partnerships. We generally don't get involved in partnership disputes. We generally don't get involved in those. But yes, so if you are part of a partnership and your business is having an issue, or you're a sole trader, absolutely you can come to us. You don't need to be registered for GST. You don't need to have any of those other sort of business contexts necessarily or hurdles.
Yeah. And so you fit within that definition, it's a case-by-case situation as to whether you're classified as a small business or not. Because there's some companies might think, they might have a $10 million turnover and think they're still a small business.
We usually start from the point, Stephen, of assuming they are a small business.
Yeah.
That's generally the way that we do it. And that's why I'm actually quite pleased that there's no definition in my act, because so rather than each matter getting intensively scrutinised to make sure it's a small business, generally speaking, we start from the presumption that it is a small business, unless there's some clear flags that we go, wait a minute, this is probably, this is pushing the envelope a bit with a small business. And one of the reasons I'm a big supporter of that is, there's no perfect definition of small business. And as you all will painfully know as practitioners, every arm of government has a different definition of what is a small business. And you can go on, is it turnover? Is it headcount? The list is endless in how you can class it. So we really generally start from the presumption that there's, a presumption that they're a small business, unless it's blatantly obvious that they're not effectively.
And the action that can be taken can be, though, against it can be against another small business or a large business or a medium-sized business. Is that
yeah,
right?
absolutely. So definitely. So, and the exception around the size is in the retail leasing space. So, we have large listed property companies, landlords who come to us, and that's fine because that's under a different piece of legislation. But yeah, so it can be literally a dispute pretty much with anybody apart from customers, effectively, or your fellow business partners, really. And we will deal with that. And then what we do as part of that assessment of the matters too is decide, is this something that could go to mediation straight away? Is it needs to go to mediation straight away? Or can we have a crack, as I said at the start, with that early intervention? And all of that is completely free. The only point at which there's any fees, which for mediation is $195 per party, which is super cheap, because for those of you who know, been involved in these in the past, which I'm sure you have in a commercial context, the market rate is about $3 to $5 grand for a commercial mediation. So it's but you'd only have to pay that $195 if you go through a formal mediation, which, as I said, almost half of our matters get resolved without that.
So let's say let's say you can't get the early resolution by just talking to the parties. And then, obviously you then need to take it further. What is there anything that binds the person that the disputes with to a decision that's ultimately made, or what actually happens in that particular process?
Yeah, what's the enforceability? A really important part of alternative dispute resolution is that it's voluntary and it's through the consent of the parties, and that includes the outcomes as well. So there's some very limited situations in which I can make a determination or an order that are predominantly in smash repairs and some of the COVID rent relief provisions that were in place. But broadly speaking, it's for the parties to decide on the outcome. And then, but what we do through the mediation, if it proceeds to mediation, there's a formal mediation agreement, the terms of settlement, terms of settlement. So if the parties do actually agree to resolve the dispute on certain terms, the mediator actually captures that on the day and endeavours to try and get everyone to sign on the day. It's done virtually with all the fancy technology that we have these days. So generally, so you have the contractual obligation. Then if you had an agreement and then the other party didn't follow through with that, so they agreed to something in the mediation, or then maybe they stuck with it for a little bit and then didn't, and we see that from time to time, particularly in a landlord-tenant relationship around payment plans. So maybe agree to receiving the money over a longer period of time, and the person might make the party might make a couple of payments and then sort of stops, and then the outcome of needing to enforce that would be, you'd need to go to a tribunal or a court. So mostly, usually the tribunal, which is VCAT here in Victoria. But broadly, because the idea is that alternative dispute resolution is about empowering the parties to decide on the outcome themselves. And part of the reason we can do it so quickly and so cheaply is it's not as formal as court. There's no evidence that's led. There's not that sort of sitting in judgment. And also part of the spirit of alternative dispute resolution is it actually puts the power back in the parties' hands, so they're not having something sort of inflicted on them by a third party. So for those ones where the agreements don't stick, what the parties would normally talk to their advisors about, is it worthwhile proceeding on to seek enforcement through a tribunal or go to a court and make some really pragmatic commercial decisions. And one of the things we're seeing at the moment quite a bit, Stephen, and I know your practitioners will be very much as well, is the financial precarious nature of the financial situation of some of the parties that we're dealing with. So the commercial reality is that with some of the ones that fall over, you can go off to court, you'll likely get a hollow judgment and no money at the end of the day anyway. Now, depending on the particular circumstances for your clients and the like, that'll be a factor for them to consider, weighing up the pros and cons of that. And also retail leasing's a bit more complicated in terms of steps to be able to take to evict people and the like. So, but that's the spirit of it very much is you don't have a decision inflicted on you. It's something that you agree to as well.
How long generally do these, let's say you can't get the early resolution, you put your application in, what sort of time frame are you talking about?
It's normally within 3 months. Yeah,
Okay.
within 3 months. And that's inclusive of us helping at the start as well too. So, and 3 months kind of at the tail end of that. So as in terms of that's the worst case scenario. So if you have a situation where you're aware of a small business and there's a degree of urgency, an obvious one that comes up for us a fair bit is eviction. When eviction's on the table, we can, the beauty of delivering in a hybrid model, which is now predominantly virtual for our mediations, doing them online, is we can organise them as fast as we can get the parties to agree to sign the mediation agreement, grab a mediator, which isn't too hard because we've got around 40 of them, get the parties to pay the fees and get the relevant documents to each other. So we've been able to organise mediations in like a day if we really need to. And that decision is sort of, we control that in terms of our triaging and prioritisation of the work. So from the clients you might be advising, generally it's about a 3-month period, which compares extremely favourably to the wait times at courts and tribunals, which at the moment we're hearing are booking out to first hearings in 2024 from filing proceedings now. So we do encourage people sometimes to have a bet each way. So if your clients feel like the tribunal or the court pathway is where they need to go, one option you've got is actually doing that, sure, and also at the same time trying to get a mediation through us at the same time as well too, because if you go through the other processes for formal mediation, you'll be paying, at least $5,000 probably for a mediation. Whereas there's no harm done. What we say, if you're in a waiting list for 2 years to get your matter heard, what's the harm in coming and doing a half-day mediation with us? Because of those that go through to mediation, over 70% of those resolve at mediation as well too. So the chances that you walk away with your dispute resolved are actually really quite high.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. So when you, let's say, there are different parties that you might have disputes with, and I assume that each one of them might be have a slight different nuance in relation to how you deal with it. So, let's say you've got a dispute with a government department, what's normally the process with that?
That's a great example because we take a slightly different approach with government departments because we've got some different things in our toolkit for that as well too. So if it was a dispute with a government department or council, for example, what we generally do, if that comes in sort of through our dispute process stream through our website, we would normally pluck that out. And our advocacy and engagement team would actually deal with that, because what we find, or in almost every instance, us just straight away picking up the phone and having a conversation with the relevant council or government department to say, hey, what's going on here, is really powerful in resolving a lot of the friction of the issues. And over the course even of our history, we've only had to do a handful of formal sort of mediations when government's involved, because normally we're able to influence the department or the council in order to be able to the appropriate conversations with the individual, so not all the parties. So normally when we make contact, that normally shakes the tree loose, so to speak. And sometimes with the larger organizations, what we see is that it's not what the CEO would be wanting, or the head of a department, secretary of a department would be wanting the experience of a small business dealing with them, or CEO of a council. It's not what they would actually want the small business's experience to be. But as with any large organization, when you've got processes, policies, you've got human beings involved, people make mistakes, people leave, processes fall through the gaps, that kind of stuff. Sometimes just stuff gets stuck in the machine. And usually our intervention at that point can make a really powerful difference for the small business without needing to go through mediation and the like. Often us making contacts enough to sort of get a good outcome.
So, and then what about, say, farmers? Because sometimes they can go through farm debt mediation and those sorts of things as well.
That's right. Yeah.
What do you normally find with because we've got some accountants that deal with, they're in rural areas that deal with farmers, and they generally, there's always disputes of some sort or another.
Absolutely, and the farming ones are even more complex. They always involve significant sums of money, but the money is in some ways the least hard part of it. It's the emotional context, it's the family context, it's questions around legacy. And if you're the generation where things are getting wobbly for the farm, there's lots of pressure that comes to bear with that. And it's so hard for a small business to be in a business level of business distress. And that's hugely amplified in the farming space, because you're not only talking about a business, you're talking about a home, you're talking about a family legacy. There's often issues around succession planning or disputes that come up in that space as well, with intergenerational transfers and all that sort of stuff. So we work really closely with the rural financial counsellors. So I think in addition to your practitioners, provide a really important part of the ecosystem, and a really, really important part that we see through farm debt, which I think your practitioners can, do play a really significant role in, is mapping out what the scenarios look like. What are actually the pathways forward? What does it look like? Is it possible to reduce some of the holdings in order to liquidate some cash? Is it possible to restructure the business? How viable actually is the farm as a business? And like one of the things that we hear a fair bit too is the value in those conversations with the farmers who are impacted as well. So if we hear from time to time, look, I owe, when they're doing all the sums of who owes, because partly that's the power of doing all the working through, right? What do you owe? Let's go through everybody that you owe. Let's look at your assets, look at your business, your profitability, what's your yield looking like, all that stuff. And sometimes we will hear from farmers that, I owe money to so-and-so for fertilizer or whatever, but don't worry, they're really relaxed about what they get it. But then at the same time, that business is also receiving support because people aren't paying their bills. Yes. So it's this, and in the regional communities, obviously the ripple effect of the stone in the pond is much bigger, because you're all living in similar areas, you're seeing each other, and your social and your family are often interwoven as well too. So you don't have the level of anonymity that you might have in a pure business transaction in a metro or the CBD space. So some of the things we're seeing in farm debt at the moment is it's a bit of a two-speed economy, I guess, if you like. There's some parts of ag which have obviously been going really well for the last couple of years. Others parts, and particularly in horticultural, that are not, and they're impacted. Well, everyone's impacted by staff shortages, of course, but some are obviously impacted by shortages of staff, but also changes to export opportunities and restrictions as well. So what we do is we work in the farm debt space, really bring a high level of empathy to those farm debt mediations. So we cherry pick which mediators we assign to the farm debt mediations, one who are familiar not only with the rules of the scheme, but also understand the regional and the ag context as well, because I think that's really important. And one of the things we've done is, I mentioned before, we're doing virtually because we moved overnight, as everyone did, to doing everything online. So we're keeping the bulk of our mediations virtually, because all of the research that we've done is that it gets at least as good, if not better, outcomes, and the satisfaction rate's much higher. The parties love it because they don't have to worry about coming into the CBD and stuff for mediation. But farm debt is one of those ones that's an exception to that. So the research that we did showed that for farm debt mediations, it's much more powerful to have all the parties physically in a room. And generally speaking, unless they want to, that's not in the city in Melbourne. We do it closer to the farmer, of course, but do it in, have their advisors in the room, have the bank in the room. They could be their accountants, solvency practitioners, could be the rural financial counsellors. Get them all in a room together where you can work through what the options are. And we've seen some really thoughtful movement from financial institutions during COVID as well, around willingness to be flexible about the debt as well. And not only the debt in terms of writing some aspects of the debt off, but also to around if a property has to get sold. And so I've got some formal roles in farm debt. So effectively, banks can't take enforcement action against a farmer to enforce a mortgage, to force a sale without coming to get a certificate from me first, effectively, is kind of just the crude way to sort of put it. And one of the things that we've really seen is the willingness of banks to have conversations with the farmers, but also not only about the actual dollars involved, but how the property is sold. Sure. So I caught up with a regional bank just last week, and they were using the example of that during the last couple of years, they haven't done a single foreclosure on a farm. Now, there's properties that have had to be sold, and the bank's told them they need to be sold, but they've given them some runway to go, right, you've got 12 months or what have you, whatever the time period, you've got some time, sell it. We're not going to put the mortgagee sale on the front in front of your house. Like you're going to have, you're going to be able to do it, manage your reputation. You're going to be able to manage a bit more of the market, I guess, in your own way. The bank still wants their money and still needs the money, but just to give them a bit more leeway in the farming context than they might otherwise have, for all those reasons that we were talking about communities and impact as well.
Okay. Well, just a couple of last questions before we open it up to the attendees. First one is, how do you interact with, say, the likes of, say, an AFCA or some of the other, government organisations that are out there that also do a similar thing? So, is it possible that there can be, it could be, say AFCA is probably a good example. It can be something with AFCA, and then same dispute trying to be resolved by yourself. How do you work through that?
Yes. So there are absolutely, as you've said, some complementary service providers. We refer matters to AFCA quite regularly, or AFCA might send stuff to us as well. We also work closely with the federal Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman. That's a mouthful. Bruce Bilson, who has a equivalent role, but that's right, with federal issues. Bruce is usually well known to most people, so who does in the federal kind of space. So we've got referral protocols in place for when we think, even if there's overlapping jurisdiction, we think one entity is better placed to deal with it than the other. And then part of it too is also us and my staff being really across what are the different pathways and channels. So, for example, if someone came to us with a complaint about the tax office, for example, what our advice would normally be is, here are the correct channels to go through the tax office to raise your issue and concern. These are the right people to talk to. This is who you need to contact, and then to make sure, obviously, that the tax office had responded appropriately to that as well. So we try not to double up, but try to create an ecosystem where the small businesses themselves don't need to sweat so much about exactly where they need to go. But if they come to us and actually they really should go to AFCA, that then we will do a warm transfer, if you like, across to AFCA. And sometimes for small businesses, we refer them to other players in government who have a regulatory role. So just recently, Consumer Affairs here in Vic instituted legal prosecution, like a criminal prosecution against another business that we had referred to them who'd done something bad to a small business in terms of taking money and not doing what they said they would do and having a pattern of behaviour. So we actually sent a whole heap of information, including evidence and brief and stuff, across to Consumer Affairs Vic, and they ended up filing criminal proceedings against that other business as well. So we try and take a holistic lens to how can we get the best outcome for the small business with the issue that's on hand, looking really broadly across government as well.
So I know that, we've tried to cover a lot in 30 minutes. If anybody wants to get further information about the services that you provide, what's the best place to go?
So we've got a heap of information on our website. So it's vsbc.vic.gov.au, and our phone number is 13VSBC as well, which is 138722. Heap of information available on there, and that's also how you can access our online portal. So you can, we ask when users are using it for the first time, they register, and you can actually then lodge a dispute through there and keep track of your dispute through that portal that we have as well. And I can see, Stephen, we've got a question from Michael.
Yes,
so no, it's not limited to Victorian government authorities. Realistically, so we're not limited by that way in the jurisdiction. Realistically, we would assess those kinds of issues based on where we think you get the best impact and who would have the best capacity to be able to deal with it. So, for example, if a small business raised an issue with us about, say, New South Wales State Revenue Office or their equivalent, in practice, probably what we would do is we would call our colleagues in New South Wales at the New South Wales Small Business Commission and say, we think this one's best dealt with you. But the answer would be that we try and make sure no one falls through the cracks. And yes, so it's a Victorian small business, and the nature, so as long as someone's got a connection to Victoria, and the nature of business these days are that often they're working across like state borders as a minimum, if not, internationally. So we regularly deal with, for example, with complaints or disputes from small businesses who are having disputes with large multinational companies, and we deal with all of those as well. So is there a connection to Victoria, and are we the best placed to deal with it, is sort of how we approach that question, Michael.
I suppose really, the encouragement there is that if someone thinks that it's a service that they might be able to utilise, just to make initial contact with you anyway, and you'll be able to point them in the right direction as to whether it's right for them or where they might be able to go.
That's right, exactly. There's no wrong front door, if you like.
Yeah, excellent. Any other questions from any of the attendees today? If they're not, I know that we're just about right on time anyway, Linda. Thank you very much for spending the time explaining what your organisation actually does and what you do. I think it's one of those areas, again, that as more people learn how to actually utilise the service. I know you're already pretty busy with what you're doing, but I suspect that over the next short period of time, you'll be even busier with the way that all the challenges that are post-COVID are coming through.
Thanks, Stephen. And I think if I can just quickly jump in, I think the role that practitioners in your space play is really important, and obviously anyway with the broader ecosystem for business, but the stories and things that you hear during the course of it, and why are they in a pickle from their financial situation in the first place, and sometimes because they haven't been paid. And we've got so many examples, for example, where people have delivered services or provided goods, services, delivered goods, and they just haven't been paid, and they're getting radio silence back from the other. And then with our involvement, we've been able to get them the money. Sometimes that's even on a payment plan, which it's not ideal because it's not the original payment terms, but it's better than nothing. And then they often end up getting the money. So when you've got those businesses coming in distress, I think that's something to have a think about. Well, who owes you money that hasn't paid you? And is that something we can help with? And we can also connect them into a number of mental health supports as well. because certainly we know at the moment the levels of mental anguish and distress in small business are exponentially up, obviously, for obvious reasons. So if you do have a client who is really struggling with the really hard questions that they're thinking about with the financial viability of the business going forward and otherwise, we can refer them into really good free government support programs where they can get really good help as well too.
Thank you very much for that. So thanks very much for spending the time and explaining what your service actually does. Thanks everybody for taking the time to actually attend once again today. Look out for the next session that we've got in a few weeks' time, where we're talking about director identification numbers. And then our final session for the year, we've got Warren Hogan back to talk about the economy. So keep a lookout for the invitations. And again, Linda, thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic.
Thanks everybody for attending.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Cheers.